We as humans are all about pattern recognition, and that's what music and rhythm is, really. That's probably also responsible for the ongoing existence and success of rhythm games. And I'm willing to bet that at one point you owned a plastic guitar, assuming you don't still have one somewhere in your house, because I know I still do. And that is only one way of playing rhythm games, aside from using a keyboard, a phone, your entire body, or even a washing machine. It turns out there is a lot going on under the hood of a rhythm game, from timing window difficulty and mechanical depth to performative play and beat map flow. There is so much to talk about that I'll split this video into two parts so I get to explain all of those things as I take you through my journey of finding out what makes a good rhythm game. Let's go! Based on Wikipedia, rhythm games are a genre of music-themed games that challenge the player's sense of rhythm. It's such a common concept that it keeps showing up in games that have nothing to do with music or rhythm at all. Arguably, the first rhythm game was something called Dance Aerobics, released in 1987 on the NES. Later on, Bemani popularized the rhythm game genre with Beatmania in the East and also developed Gitadora in 1999. Now, if you think it looks familiar, it's because Harmonix were inspired by it to create Guitar Hero, which subsequently popularized rhythm games in the West. And no one plays rhythm games in Europe. Later on, picked up by Neversoft, Guitar Hero 3 became the first game to hit 1 billion in sales. So rhythm games were here to stay. Except not Guitar Hero, because someone got greedy and oversaturated the market with too many sequels instead of just adding DLC, killing the IP in the process. In my efforts of trying to find an official classification of rhythm games, I couldn't find anything. So here is my own list of rhythm games categorized based on gameplay. It turns out it's very difficult to separate rhythm games because a majority of them have the same core concept for decades and only differentiate themselves from others through the direction in which the notes are coming from, be it upward scrolling, down scroll, sideways, or yes. These are all known as vertical scrolling rhythm games, which I think is a very limiting term, so I would much rather call them highway scrolling rhythm games, to account for any kind of gameplay that involves nodes scrolling towards you regardless of direction. Nowadays, most rhythm games are in Asian arcades dominated by Bemani, and the household market of PC and console rhythm games seem to be driven by indies, pushing the boundaries of rhythm game design as much as they can. And as a rhythm game player myself, I would love that design boundary to be pushed even further, so here is me trying to contribute to that effort with a summary of good rhythm game design practices, starting with the hook. Arcade cabinets are the masters of nailing down a strong concept and communicating it through both gameplay and the way they look. The game's concept is arguably the most important element because it acts as the initial hook of getting someone to try the game in the first place. The important part is differentiating between a cheap gimmick and a strong concept. And it's rather difficult to tell these apart because it's a pretty subjective topic. For example, Friday Night Funkin' managed to make their main selling point narrative-driven content releases bundled as weeks. So you should rely on playtesting and feedback to identify if you ended up designing a gimmick or a strong concept for your game.
After studying your results for the past minute, I have to say, they're not very impressive.
A gimmick tends to be something rather superficial. From my experience, they tend to rely on the player's reaction time, without any proper telegraphing. For example, most rhythm games require you to catch notes on what is called a judgment line. A lot of games have one, and some of them have two. However, Figros is a rhythm game on the iOS that moves and rotates that judgment line around the screen during gameplay. And I would argue that this is a gimmick because it relies on the player memorizing the judgment line's behavior without any telegraphing at all, compared to a similar game called Citus, which also moves the judgment line, but it does so in a predictable pattern. On the other hand, a properly designed strong concept has mechanical depth, and just like a gameplay mechanic, it can be built upon throughout the duration of the game. A good example of this can be found in the one-button game Rhythm Doctor, developed by 7th Beat Games, where the team name dictates the gameplay. You have to hit spacebar on the 7th beat. I talked to Hafiz Azman, the designer of Rhythm Doctor, and he said that
a mechanic should be versatile so that it can support different kinds of music in different ways.
And as a designer, a strong concept would allow you to introduce new ideas and use them in a variety of scenarios without feeling cheap. It would be flexible and bring depth to the player's experience.
The way I design levels in Rhythm Doctor was more like what you expect from a game like Mario. I usually have a specific rhythm I want the player to learn, and then I'm trying to stretch one idea out in as many different directions as I can to figure out like what are the fun iterations to this idea that could work, but that also feel cohesive with the main idea of the level.
But aside from your game having a good initial hook, it also needs to hold up during gameplay and maintain the player's attention. And when I asked several people what they thought the most important aspect of a rhythm game is, the answer was almost always flow. Now, aside from this sounding like a weird, indescribable spiritual thing, have you noticed that whenever a game allows you to upload your own custom song to auto-generate a level, it feels disappointing compared to playing something handcrafted by the developers? That is because an auto-generated level doesn't take flow into consideration, which is a rather tricky topic that is difficult to describe directly since it's something that the player feels. A level in a rhythm game is most oftenly called a chart or a beat map. You will know which one is which because someone from the community will correct you. The act of placing notes down on a chart is called charting, and it's as an important discipline as level design in any other game. Taro Nuke, a well-known chart designer in the rhythm game communities, told me that a good chart is one that makes you feel clever and skilled for getting through it. And the beauty of rhythm game design is that you can achieve that feeling in a variety of ways. For example, when you craft your chart, you can place what are known as discrete notes. These are notes that are well spaced apart and are most commonly found in lower difficulty songs. They kind of lack the flow feeling, and that's why counterintuitively, playing a song on easy is actually harder than higher difficulties. Now, the good kind of flowing charts come from using continuous clusters of notes that have various names such as jacks, streams, rolls, amongst many others. I have linked some resources in the description for more details on note terminology. Now, when used right, these continuous note patterns create a very intuitive way of playing, like the notes in Beat Saber, where you have to slice individual notes in specific directions. The chart designers were careful to take the player's arm inertia into consideration when placing those notes, so every downward slice flows naturally into an upwards one, creating that flow sensation. Another important thing in a VR rhythm game is to make sure that the player's controllers won't have to collide with each other, and that's why you probably won't ever see a song asking you to do this. The equivalent of good flow in other games such as Dance Dance Revolution translates into charts that guide the player around the pad in a way that feels intuitive, or the stream patterns in Guitar Hero inspired by real guitar tapping techniques. Just like other gameplay mechanics, these can be introduced in a safe environment at the beginning of the song and expanded upon later on towards the end. Rhythm Doctor makes an effort to teach players mechanics through both visual and audio cues. When the game starts, you are asked to simply tap your key on the 7th beat, but later on in the first train ride level, you must hold down your key for a few moments and release it on time. Observe how this is communicated both by the animated notes as well as the song itself. The best charts out there follow intensity curves, also commonly used in directing movies and trailers, by ramping things up gradually. And while there's merit to charts that are just all hard all the time, they end up being less memorable because all the parts blend together. This intensity curve is something also found very often in tutorial design, and I made an entire video about that topic, link in the description. It can also be seen later on in that exact same train ride level, where the game twists this mechanic even further, altering its timing and patterns. How much you should push a mechanic is up to you as the designer. Now, predictability can also be reflected in decisions such as what instrument do you chart your notes to. it seems that charting notes on the percussion of a song, like the drums, tends to be more predictable. And it's what games like Crypt of the Necrodancer does in order to allow for enough player cognitive bandwidth for the dungeon crawling part of the game. Charting notes on the vocal track achieves a similar easy difficulty effect because most often than not, singers tend to actually sing slower than regular speech, resulting in rather slow oncoming notes. On the other hand, charting notes on the lead instrument tends to feel more exciting to play, but also more difficult, which is what high-level charts seem to do. But if we take a step further and try to break down the need of flow in rhythm games, we stumble upon a topic that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, and that is how the player feels and looks while they play the game. This is not a widely discussed concept as it tends to be a more hidden aspect of rhythm game design. So talking about the surface level of this concept, it first starts with how the player feels when they play. If you perform well during a song, the game can reward you through a combination of sound effects and visual cues. There is a certain charm to hearing the clicks of the player input perfectly synchronized with the song. But a game can also make you feel badass through built-in events, such as triggering star power in Guitar Hero by tilting your guitar, yet another feature borrowed from a Bemani game. And even without using their custom peripherals, if you've played Guitar Hero on PC like I did, the default key binding layout was designed in such a way that you have to hold your keyboard like a guitar. Certain creative charts in games like Beat Saber have notes placed in such a way that they encourage you to follow the original song's dance choreography. And there are entire game franchises based on this concept alone. But I think a good designer can push this even further, and this is where the hidden design comes into play, which is all about how the player looks. It's something I like to call performative play, and it's the idea that the game is designed in such a way that high-level gameplay makes the player look impressive. Think of the doubles mode in DDR, where someone is completely crushing a song using both dance pads. Or in Beat Saber, for example, on the surface level, a novice player will simply focus on slicing the notes in the correct direction, barely using their wrists, which doesn't look that impressive. However, a skilled player knows that the game scores you based on the angle of your cut and how much you follow through that cut, amongst other variables. And this knowledge results in wider swings that look more impressive when you pair them with a dense chart that flows well. Another good example of performative play is found in one of my favorite rhythm games called Dance Rush Stardom. Sadly only available in arcades and developed by, you guessed it, it's basically the sequel to DDR. You have a highway of oncoming notes that you're supposed to catch with either your left or your right foot, and the play area is a huge and flashy matrix of LEDs. The performative design comes from the game only checking your horizontal position for scoring purposes, but still giving you enough space to move around vertically on the entire playing surface. Highly skilled players also know that there is actually no difference between the left and right notes, and they can be triggered with any foot. So when the game throws these notes at you, a novice player can catch them like this. And a more experienced player can tackle those exact same notes with way more flair, which is just awesome. And the note placement and the notation combined with the size of the play area allows for a lot of creative expression in the player's dance moves. It's really the equivalent of games like Dishonored that allow you to tackle the same challenge in multiple ways, but in a rhythm game. And the developers fully embrace the idea of performative play at high levels by having judges during official tournaments take the player's dance style into consideration when they pick the winner. The beauty of performative play is that it can act as a form of marketing, making the game look appealing to outsiders that are unfamiliar with the gameplay but impressed with the player's performance. Because I don't know about you, but I got into rhythm games after seeing a handful of YouTube videos in the late 2000s of players absolutely destroying Guitar Hero, and I thought to myself, I wanna do that too. Now, these big design pillars like strong concepts, note flow, and performative play only tell half of the story. And because there is so much more to talk about when it comes to rhythm games, I'll cover the other half in the next video. We'll be talking about why rhythm games should have difficulty depth, embrace community-created content, as well as brushing over other topics such as accessibility and progression systems. So if you want to find out what truly makes a rhythm game tick, I'll be seeing you in the next video. This is that fucking annoying part of the video where most people close the tab. The part where we have to feed the algorithm, and so I kindly ask you to engage with all them pretty buttons down there. Now, you know how YouTube is run by robots, and I think it's fair to have a little deal where if you've learned something new from this video, in exchange, I want you to consider liking it or subscribing as a way to make those robots potentially show this video to other fellow curious souls like us. Now, for a robotless and more personal kind of interaction, I'd like to personally invite you over on Discord to continue this conversation and talk about game design in general. It's the first link in the description. Until then, the little robots think you're going to like these specific videos. So, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the comments.